I am just so honored and feel extremely privileged to be able to talk about this topic tonight, shared liberation, and what does that mean? Um, I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, and my parents were part of the Great Migration to the North from the Delta of Mississippi. I understood as a child that there was something very different about the way white people spoke to and responded to my parents. I didn't fully understand all that they had to go through until I grew older. When I was a little girl, I couldn't understand why my father was saying yassa and nasa to young boys that were 9 and 10 years old when we were in Mississippi. I couldn't understand either why we could only drink out of a colored only water fountain, not just in Mississippi, but in Waterloo, Iowa as well. So there were many factors that were going on in my life as a young child that didn't make sense to me. And it wasn't until I was probably 13 or 14 years old that I got into the civil rights movement and things that were going on because my parents were engaged in civil rights. They were marching and they were picketing. It wasn't until then that I understood what I needed to escape from and what it meant for my father to come out of the Delta of Mississippi, where it took him and my mother 2 years to earn $100 because they were picking cotton for 50 cents a day. I didn't understand that they were sharecroppers, and sharecropping was no different than being a slave to me. Because when you're working for 50 cents a day, and somebody can tell you that your whole family needs to be out there picking cotton, and if a family didn't do that, all of the things that came with it, I didn't understand what it meant to have even white bread, because all the bread my mother made was homemade and homemade biscuits. And I had such a thirst and a desire to get a piece of white bread. I didn't understand that I needed to be liberated from that way of thinking. I didn't understand the stereotypes and the labels that had been placed upon me, placed upon my family, my parents, my grandparents. I thought that I was the prettiest and cutest little thing going, because everybody in my community used to say, look at Bob Ann. They never called me Barbara. Look at Bob Ann. She's going to do something with herself. I didn't understand that I even lived in the ghetto until I graduated from college and got my first job in HR and pulled out my file, and they said I lived in the ghetto. I didn't know Waterloo, Iowa had a ghetto, much less that I was living in. I didn't understand that when my sister, who's a year younger than me, wanted to be the angel in the nativity scene for the high school play, and she was told there was no such thing as a Black angel. I didn't understand how could that be when the Bible that I read said that God made all of us in his image. Somewhere there had to be a Black angel. I didn't understand when I found out that my parents, my father's, my grandfather's father was a Choctaw Indigenous American. I didn't understand what it meant to be Choctaw. I didn't understand what it meant to be an Indigenous American. But as I grew older, I understood what it meant to be liberated from all those stereotypes and all those things that were said about me. My inability to be bright, my inability to even be viewed as beautiful, my inability to be something more than what white America had said that I could be. My mother and my father always told me, you have to be not just better, you got to be 10 times better. And still, I found that that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough back then. And there are times today when I see that it is still not enough. So what does liberation really look like? It looks like that place when you have an awakening in your whole being, in your soul, that says, I am more than this. I came from great people. The only reason that we're still here is because we were the survivors. I have agency in this country. My indigenous American brothers and sisters, this is their land. They own it. And I am so grateful to them for the fight that they continue to have, the strength that I see in them. When I see Ricky, I am just excited to see him because I know Ricky, he is not just Ricky Defoe. He is always on the battlefield. He's a warrior in his own right, and I am with him. I see him as someone who lived the life that we read about, and still he rises, and still he wants his people and his children to rise. I see all of us that are part of this as being the opposite of every negative thing that has ever been said about us. Quietly, I learned young to quietly push back against the avalanche of oppression in all of its forms. I was pushing, I was pulling, I was digging all of the time. I'd like to say that I've stopped, but I haven't. But what I can say is that it's gotten easier for me. The terrain is different. The issues are still the same. One thing about ASDIC was that I was blessed to meet others who have and are fighting for the same fight against systemic and structural racism. I began to meet other humans of different races, cultures, nationalities, religions, lifestyles, sexual orientations, some of whom were immigrants, some who were first-generation citizens, speaking a different language, but having the same passion, the same desire to get what we all want, which is just to live, to have our families, and to be seen as human. I found that I shared this necessity for liberation with many, many people. I think it was in 2012 when I first learned about ASDIC. I remember going to a church, and there was Okogeman and Marjorie, and they were teaching a session. And in that session, they started talking about sleight of mouth. I said, sleight of mouth? What the devil is that? Ah, little did I know that I would leave that session with a hunger and a thirst for more. I sought him out. I was looking up emails so I could find out when was the first time I talked to a Kogeman. And I think we went to lunch after that session. And I had nerve enough to say, thank you for the lunch that we went to, but when can we meet next week? 1 week wasn't enough. I wanted more time. And why did I want more time with Okogeman? Because I saw him as a leader. I saw him as cutting down the grass, the high grass in the field that was in the way, the high grass in the field that would allow me to see what was really down under, beneath all of these things that we think we know about America. When I met with him after that, I signed up for an ASDIC training. I began to read Joe Fagan's book that talked about the white racial frame. You know, there's something about that book that it turns you upside down and inside out. There are things in that book that I had never heard of before. The backroom conversations that take place. The history of America that looks through a lens of a white man versus what I had known. Not just any white man, but somebody who's really willing to write down the truth and to share it boldly. And not only was the book powerful, but in those, I thought I went to 12 sessions. They're saying 10, but it felt like 12. Every session was chock full of more information than any one person could consume at one time. So I went to the first session and I thought, I need to do this again. I went to the second session and I thought, I did get a little bit further along this line. But then I went to a third session. And after that, I tell you, I stopped counting. But I have a library full of manuals. And I don't know how Dr. Perkins was able to put so much in a manual and so much time. And it's written so well. And in those manuals, there is life as you read about people, the poems, the stories, they come alive. And not do you just see the words, but you see the people and you feel the spirit. What happened for me in this session was that pulling in me, that yearning to learn, the sitting, listening, and being listened to, told me that I had met my folks and I had met my village. The village of people that I was yearning to be around here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. A village that was really trying to be in this fight around shared liberation. People who were bold and unapologetically bold, who were still bold and unapologetically bold. No sense in apologizing for when you're speaking the truth. Don't make no sense to me. And what I found is that I found a family. Not only did I meet Okogemon and Marjorie, but I met Maria and I met Sue. I met Ricky Defoe. I met Sue Hammersmith, who's not just a co-author, but a friend and like a sister. I met Marie, I met Deborah Lee, Kitty Goggins, Scott Russell, Steve Martinez and his wife, and many, many more. And I tell you, I know that I could call any of those people at any time and have a conversation with them about a struggle that I find myself in as it looks to systemic structural racism and oppression. I found that I had a group of people that had a shared understanding of what it meant to be in the struggle together. And not just be in the struggle, but be knowledgeable, to do the work. You can't do this work and not know your history, because if you don't know where you came from, you can't get where you're going. You got to know it. And it's laid out so well. But what I found out in all of this is that we had a shared understanding of the real history of America. We had some shared agreement around what has happened, what is happening, and what might, in many ways, continue to happen. We had a respect for each other, and we began to join forces and work together and fight against oppression and injustice, the violence, the policing, training our eyes on the true enemy, white supremacy in all of its forms, helping white people understand this is not about you. Because the culture of white supremacy is a culture that we all were raised in and grew up in. And there are opportunities for all of us, no matter your race, to step into some form or some characteristic of white supremacy if we're not careful. It comes with a lot of learning. So what I am happy about in this shared liberation is that we remain vigilant as advocates, allies, and accomplices, that we understand what each of those things are, and that we don't get in the way of understanding our roles in each of those places with the populations that we're with, that we have a shared understanding that there's strength and vulnerability in this fight, and that we take care of each other. Because every time you stand out there and say, I am fighting against systemic and structural racism, you better believe that there's somebody out there that wants to take you down. But you don't have to stand alone. There's a limitless capacity that I see amongst the people that I've talked about for us to love, to serve, to create new spaces for and with each other. I am so excited and delighted that I had the opportunity to be a part of ASDIC. And not that I'm gone, I'm still a part of ASDIC, because ASDIC doesn't have any throwaway people. They value every human being. The experience itself offers a stellar methodology for engaging in conversations about race and white privilege. The trainings offered are provocative and steeped with tons and tons of learning. So I have to go, and I hate to leave you, but I really must go. But what I want to say to you is to take care of each other and do so with compassion, love, and action. Thank you for the invitation.